Welcome to Email After Hours by SenderScore, powered by Validity.
We're your hosts. My name is Guy Hansen.
And I'm Danielle Gallant, and this is Email After Hours.
We're back with part 2 of our outstanding conversation with industry titan Al Iverson. So for those of you that were with us just a few days ago for part 1, you'll remember that we were discussing how today's best practices should be adopted before they become tomorrow's new laws. So Danielle, for any of our listeners that weren't with us for part 1, do you want to give them a quick recap?
Absolutely. And first of all, go back and listen to part 1. But in part 1, we talked about the new Yahoo and Gmail standards, whether they're going to get even tougher, and how there may even be some elements we haven't considered yet that come into play in the email ecosystem. So, Guy, are you ready for part 2 of our conversation with Al?
I am absolutely ready. Let's get going. Now that we've addressed the sort of stuff that's been front of mind with email senders for the past few months, DMARC, list unsubscribe, spam complaints, let's move on and sort of talk about other metrics that might be required in the compliance arena of the future. And perhaps one which crosses my mind is what we've sometimes called hidden metrics. Those sort of KPIs which senders don't necessarily have visibility of, but the mailbox providers certainly do. And they send some pretty strong signals of good or bad behavior. I'm thinking of this is not spam notifications when emails are intentionally recovered from junk and put back in the inbox. I'm thinking of when a recipient does add a sender to their trusted list because they really do want to receive their emails, or they do execute an organic forward. I received a great email and I thought, hey, I would like to see that, to name just a few. And, while they might not necessarily have full visibility of those metrics, I think that senders should absolutely be aware of them and perhaps even thinking about are there ways that they can be intentional about influencing them and perhaps amplifying them.
And even to add to that, there are some things that the sender doesn't necessarily have great control over that sort of come through as a hidden reputation metric. When I think of those, I think of really 2 different things there. Number one, domain reputation, but not just for yourself, but for the other places that you link to. Bitly is a perfect example of that. If you're using somebody else's domain as a link tracking domain or redirect domain, you're sort of sucked into this vortex of what is the reputation of that other person's domain? And that might be one of those things that you're doing everything right. You're sending wanted mail, is generally highly engaged. But now suddenly, because of this new click tracking domain that you don't have control over, maybe it has a poor reputation and now your mail's going to the spam folder. That's one of the things that I see people sort of struggle with. There's other bits like that too, where think of the difference in how Gmail measures engagement versus how the marketing sender measures engagement, right? We look at opens and clicks. We know that opens are now generally unreliable at the individual level, still necessary at the broad strokes level and trying to track directionality over time. But the mailbox provider has a much more accurate view of that interactivity and engagement. So it still behooves you to drive that engagement any way that you can, even if you cannot perfectly track it, right? Whether that be encouraging replies, encouraging clicks, encouraging opens. If you think about being logged into the Gmail or Yahoo Mail or Microsoft Outlook.com interface, those providers control that interface. So they sort of think of that in UX terms as the Chrome around the interface, and they can tell where somebody's interacting with the message and how it relates and what they click on, right? So they have that greater depth of understanding of engagement in a way that the marketing sender can only get sort of a taste of, especially in light of opens and after the age of NPP and Google and Yahoo proxying images.
I think that's really important for marketers to keep in mind, right? Because there's such a focus on the metrics that they can see. They need to keep in mind that there are all these things that the mailbox provider is keeping track of. But Guy and I are also hearing industry chatter along the lines of things may be getting tougher with the requirements that we're putting in place, but good senders might be rewarded for being good. And when I think of that, I think of, and I don't know how much or how often this is done anymore, but like shared IP ranges where there's a good, bad, and ugly pool. And senders can get maybe assigned to one of those. And maybe good senders could be put onto a good pool always or something. So what do you think of that? And maybe how could good senders be rewarded?
So one of the rewards that it's maybe we're not quite to the time, we're just sort of approaching the time. And what I'm thinking of there is BIMI or BIMI logos, brand identifiers for message identification, which is basically a brand logo or brand avatar that's associated with your email message. It's sort of the carrots associated with the stick of DMARC, right? It's the reward. It's the cherry on top of doing things right when you fully implemented DMARC in a restrictive and secure method. So that's one of the things there. That sender logo supposedly drives a significant boost in engagement. There's been a little bit of a dearth of studies on that have been published, but a lot of the anecdotal data or stuff we hear from backroom conversations is that BIMI does drive further engagement. There's some technical bits that make it hard to really do an easy A/B test of it, but overall, I still think it's a good thing, and I think we're going to see more of that over time. I think I'm curious to see what evolves with BIMI too, because it's kind of hard for some marketers now to get a BIMI logo. There's costs associated with that, and both from having to get a certificate to comply with some of the ISPs that support it, and then also the certificate needs a trademark underneath it. So that's the significant cost too. But I think if Google and others are sort of listening to that and understanding that there needs to be a better sort of cheaper version, a cheaper way for a smaller sender to get into the BIMI bandwagon, that will help further drive DMARC quarantine and reject protection. So in my opinion, I feel very strongly that's in the mind of the Yahoos and the Gmails of the world of what else can we do there to reward people? And looking back historically too, they've also done sort of negative rewards when they aren't doing it right. Like everybody forgets now, but when TLS was not as broadly implemented, Gmail woke up one day and said, everybody do TLS or else, or we're going to put a big scary thing on every message you send that says, this message was not encrypted in transit. Well, it's a bulk email message just telling me my burrito is ready or whatever. It doesn't matter, really. It's encrypted, in my opinion. But Gmail put a warning on it that says this message could have been something nefarious could have to do to transit. So that scared a lot of marketers, and it probably scared some of the recipients too, and that really drove adoption of that. So yeah, there's more stuff like that coming. I'm not privy to all of it as much as I like to see, but I also like that the more you do better, the more the mailbox providers are willing to talk to you, right? Yahoo implemented a new senders portal. They actually have an active ticketing system that you can reach out to where they didn't have before. Google has said that they will now reply to their ticket submissions and occasionally assist people if they see that people are complying properly. Not only is there sort of guarantees.
I'm sorry, Al.
Yeah.
They did. Google said that. We're going to reply to you.
They've got a ticketing system, right, that everybody's used for years, and they've always warned they don't reply. Basically, the way it used to work is you submit your ticket down the magic hole and watch your deliverability results. And if they've listened to you, it would improve in about 2 weeks. Now they're saying in some instances, if they see that somebody's in compliance and needs help, they theoretically they will actually reply to them. So that's a pretty significant change. So those are ways that Gmail and Yahoo both are willing to sort of better reward good senders. I think you're going to see more of that from Yahoo too. Like they've been talking a long time on and off about different dashboards and stuff that they've been working on. If you think about it, they're one of the biggest providers that doesn't have necessarily a standalone reputation portal that's accessible by everyone today. So there's going to be more stuff like that, and I'm very eager to see where it comes.
Yeah, we are too. Now, we've spoken a lot about Gmail and Yahoo today, but we've also heard literally just in the past few days that Microsoft has also confirmed that they're going to be joining the party and they're going to be enforcing a similar set of standards to those that we've seen from Gmail and Yahoo. You got any thoughts about what this might look like? Do you think they're going to be a carbon copy of Gmail and Yahoo? Do you think they might find a way of putting their own spin on their compliance standards and metrics, maybe leveraging their spam finders data perhaps?
So I watched that validity event. That was a good get everybody in the room and basically talk through what's next for the evolution of the senders requirements. So good job there. First of all, that was fantastic. Now let's play devil's advocate a little bit, because we know there's some people who came back afterwards and poked holes in it and say, well, Microsoft didn't explicitly say, or Microsoft didn't hang a banner behind you on the Zoom that says, we're actually going to do this. Pretend that Ross from Microsoft was not even on that call. Are those requirements still coming? Heck yeah. Heck yeah, they are, because it is the natural evolution to clean things up, right? Yahoo and Gmail are just naturally sort of converged on a specific level of best practices that they found compatible with what they need. And that's because that's what's appropriate for that level of large mailbox provider. Microsoft, off working on their own, being smart, are probably going to be coming to similar conclusions. So even if there was no collaborative aspect, even if they weren't part of this discussion or part of prior discussions or part of future discussions, it absolutely stands to reason that basically Microsoft is going to get on the Yahoo little bus, right? There's just no way that's not going to work that way. It's just a question of timing for that, right? I think Ross had said it's a question of when and not if.
A slight shift of topic, and I want to sort of touch one of my pet themes. I'm thinking back to Europe's GDPR experience 6 years ago. And of course, a lot of the US states have now been rolling out GDPR, similar style, new gen privacy legislation. And I think what we thought at the time was that one of the things GDPR did was it took a load of established best practices, wrote them into law. You will apply more robust consent and provide more transparency, how you're going to process your customer data, and more choice around how that processing is going to take place. And then we published some DMA research over the next 3 years that showed that email program performance was consistently improving. Deliverability got better, open rates and click rates got better, revenue got better. So it kind of felt like, guess what? All of these email senders were forced to implement what were previously best practices and now are law, and they benefited from it. So why wait? And I guess my question for you is, do you think there's sort of one or two best practices floating around at the moment, which are still best practices, not necessarily a legal requirement, but it would really be in a sender's best interest to implement them today as part of that future-proofing strategy we're talking about?
So what's really interesting to me, sort of thinking about the regulatory landscape, is that if you look at the recent Yahoo and Google requirements, they are almost a reaction to the lack of that broad federal level style requirements for opt-in permission and data handling in the US. Certainly that will continue to evolve. But if I try to look beyond it and think of things that they haven't thought of, I'm going to go weird and old school. And I think for some types of newsletter senders, news organizations, smaller marketers, double opt-in is something that they just have to sort of bite the bullet and do. It's a tough pill to swallow. People go, oh, you've been around since the late 1990s. You've been talking about double opt-in. The industry's moved on. But some of these things are so cyclical in that I see issues where smaller senders have been targeted by different types of block lists or reputation filters that are used by the big providers. Some of this back-end reputation data does make its way into Gmail and can cause spam filtering at Gmail. Anyway, long, boring story short, right? If you're a small sender and you're not doing double opt-in, eventually somebody's going to hassle you about it. And if you're not a multi-million-dollar retail marketer with the resources to defend against that and build a good reputation based on your email volume around all the other stuff you're doing, double opt-in is the best protection for the little guy. Again, it's a bitter pill to swallow because some of these people look at it and go, why do I, as a tiny sender, have to implement something that a big multi-million-dollar retailer doesn't? And that's sort of the nature of the beast.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. We'd love to see that too. So we've talked about best practices. We've talked about legal requirements. I guess the third part of this stool is industry standards like RFCs. And for listeners who don't know, and you're ready for yet another acronym from Email After Hours, an RFC stands for Request for Comments. It's a formal standards track document developed in working groups. Some of these come from Morg that we've referenced before. So Al, question for you. Do you think there's any published RFCs that senders should be familiar with that aren't? I'm thinking message formatting, for example. RFC 5322 is part of the new guidelines, but I bet most senders don't really know what it covers. What do you think?
So I can think of three things there. 5322, like you said, is now it's happening because Gmail is blocking things that are malformatted. A perfect example of that is double subject lines, double from addresses, double headers where there shouldn't be double headers. That's another thing where Gmail was very forgiving about that sort of thing in the past. Very reticent to block mail, wanted to be very forgiving of stuff that formatted incorrectly, but otherwise well-meaning. In the name of making the ecosystem more secure, that's no longer the case. They're much more likely to block that. That's one of the most popular posts and spam resources, my information page on RFC 5322 blocking. So because people were surprised by it, they don't know the history of it. And Gmail one day just turned the switch on and said, now we're doing this. The good thing is they don't really have to memorize it. It really boils down to double headers for the most of it. There's this thing called DKIM replay where people will take DKIM authenticated messages and try to re-inject them, either just to annoy or try to deliver spam. And they will often try to add part of their own content or message to that. And so adding additional headers was one of the ways to sort of sneak something in a DKIM replay. So that's probably why Gmail closed that hole. I think the other really important one, we touched on this a little bit, is RFC 8058. The one-click unsubscribe RFC that a lot of people misunderstand it, because I get asked all the time, hey, I set up one click like they told me to, but now I'm getting all of these bot click unsubscribes, non-human interaction unsubscribes. Well, if you're getting, that means you didn't quite set it up right, because the only one click is supposed to be when it's a post action triggered by the mailbox provider with a very unique and special functionality. It does not refer to the default activity of following a link or landing on a profile page or unsubscribe center. Those are still perfectly legal and acceptable to be two-click unsubscribes. And frankly, they should always be two-click unsubscribes or have some sort of requirement to at least read out bots as much as you can. That could be Capture or JavaScript or anything like that, where you don't just want something to blindly unsubscribe somebody when a link is followed, because you are going to get non-human interactions that bot click false positive unsubscribes. And the important thing there is you might not get those false positive unsubs today, but you might tomorrow, because, and we've observed that, for example, we're reverse engineering a black box. I guess I would say here, we see Microsoft targets one block of IPs today, another block of IPs tomorrow, another set of senders another day. So Microsoft, for example, they will test links as part of their security services, but they don't test all links all the time. So you set it up, you test it, it might seem fine. But when it comes to that specific Thursday, or if you hit some specific threshold where maybe you send enough mail, they're going to start sort of tickling those links and following them.
Just because we're back on the Microsoft train here, in our initial chats about today's topic and what we were going to cover, Al, you and I shared some interesting stories about sender perspectives on Microsoft's SRD program. And again, we're doing the acronym thing. SRD stands for Sender Reputation Data. For listeners who may not know, this is a Microsoft-specific feedback system, and its goal is to derive a better picture of a sender's reputation by using feedback from trusted voters rather than complaint rates, which can be misleading. And we were joking about some of the hate that this program, the SRD program, can get, but really it's a positive thing. It's a free survey for your customers, and few senders have a structured feedback process as part of their email programs. It led Guy and I to think about future-proofing email programs from the perspective that matters maybe most, which is that of your subscribers. So how do you think senders should be soliciting feedback? And do you think that would, improve the long-term quality of their programs?
They should be soliciting it every possible way, right? A lot of people have started, especially in transactional emails or notifications or follow-up from support tickets, put an actual footer in there that says, give us a positive or negative response there. Those can be kind of weighted, because if somebody's mad about why their order didn't arrive, they're going to give you a negative result regardless, but you can trend and summarize over time to see certain types of emails are getting more complaints than others. And any way you can do that, encourage responses, encourage feedback, click here to tell us what you think about this. Any sort of mechanism is better than none. Think about SRD has been around a long time. So the concept of feedback is not new. Like, when did the TV show Survivor start? Because that's how long SRD has been around. Because when I first explained SRD to people, I told people it was like getting voted off the island. Like, it's literally, that's the whole point of it, is the feedback tells Microsoft whether or not you're allowed to be on Inbox Island.
Wow, Inbox Island. I'm going with that from now on. Whenever I have to, whenever I have to justify SRD to somebody.
No, that's right.
It's so valuable too, right? It's hidden. Few people know about it, but it is an absolute necessary component, and it's very important to Microsoft because they've certainly kept it alive for all this time. And if feedback is important to them, it should be important to you as well.
That's right. And I think when we talk to our customers about it, we talk about it in those terms as well. You might not like it as a metric, but at the end of the day, these are your customers giving you some real feedback. And if 3 out of 10 of them are saying your email program's a bit sucky, well, you can stick your head in the sand and pretend not to listen, or you can go, cool, what am I going to do about that? We have had such a brilliant conversation today. We need to start wrapping it up. And we always like to close each episode with some quick fire questions. Today, we're going to keep them to the same kind of theme, and I'll start us off. So, Al, designing for accessibility. Where do you think accessibility trends are likely to go that programs might need to start getting ready for now? I mean, I think we hear a lot in industry press about sort of national increased levels of stress and sensitivity. Do you think email's going to need to start adapting to some of those trends?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think the big challenge with accessibility that I've seen has really been getting it right in dark mode, right? People will put very complex code in place to make the fonts not turn into tiny little things. And so you can still read it on the phone, and sort of that a screen reader can still pick it up. But if you do this, so many people try to design so well and do cool design tricks. Well, that's what a designer should be doing. So God bless them. But you can do it in a way that if you're not careful and testing against dark mode, that's where I see people sort of fail the most often. And I think that's the future thing that people have to start getting right, that they're not getting enough right today.
My closing question for today, we can't finish this conversation without talking about AI. Part of obtaining consent is telling the subject exactly what you are going to do with their data in plain language. And I guess the question is, do we even genuinely know how AI is going to interact with customer data? How do you think this should be reflected in consent statements?
Boy, I think right now, you'd probably want to certainly want to keep AI away from writing the consent statements, because the current AI models love to make things up, right? And they'll tell you that they're going to put your PII on a rocket ship and send it to the moon, even if you have no plans to do that, right? You look at all of the silly stuff with like the poor lawyers who relied on ChatGPT that cited cases that don't exist. So I wouldn't necessarily trust it to do any of the writing for it. And then there's the big question of, where does your data go as far as what the future of feeding that data into generative AI models? And boy, there's a lot of unresolved stuff there that I'm feeling really incapable of answering.
Yeah, no, I think a load of us are going to be wrestling with that for months and years to come. This has been such a brilliant conversation today. Al Iverson, thank you so much for joining us and being so generous with your knowledge and your insights. I think our audience is going to love today's conversation. It's been great having you with us.
Thank you both. Thank you so much. Thank you, Validity. This was a lot of fun.
Awesome. And just by way of a wrap, we'll be back again in another 2 weeks or so. And just a quick comment to you, our listeners. Danielle and I are always super proud of the great guests we bring to join us on Email After Hours. That absolutely goes for today as well. But we're always looking out for great guests in the future as well. So if there's any of you out there that might like to come and join us for a chat in an upcoming episode, drop a comment when you listen to today's episode, or ping us on LinkedIn. We'd love to chat and maybe get you in the hot seat in the weeks and months to come. Been awesome today. Bye for now.
Bye.
Be sure to tune in next time and hit subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And don't forget to visit senderscore.com for loads more great resources to help you become a stronger sender.
To all you sleepless senders out there, thank you for joining us after hours, and see you next time.